Why should you learn arpeggios? Here's why. Hey, John here with your Tuesday Blues, where I'm all about helping you understand the fretboard so that you can play the music you love. That's what it's all about. That's what we do here every Tuesday on this channel. So if it sounds like something you're into, then hit subscribe and ring that bell for notifications, and let's get into the lesson. For the longest time, I thought blues was really just about the minor pentatonic scale, and then I learned the blue note and the blues scale, and really the more scales I started to collect, surprisingly, I still seem to miss the boat somehow on arpeggios. Huge mistake. Arpeggios are simply the notes that make up a chord, and in a basic blues full of dominant seventh chord, it really pays to know your dominant seventh arpeggios. You'll need a root, a major third, a perfect fifth, and a flat seventh. Here's the A7 arpeggio to get us going. The cool thing, and kind of confusing thing, is that the arpeggio notes, those chord tones, exist in several positions on the fretboard, some in lower octaves, some in higher octaves. For example, here's the A7 arpeggio in a few different positions on the neck. Now, these are just a few example patterns. There are more ways to play the arpeggio, different fingerings available, even in these examples. And I encourage you to work out some of the different patterns on your own. Great way to learn. The best thing about these tones is that when you're jamming along with the A7 chord, these notes are really a great place to land your licks. They're kind of guaranteed to work. And as you'll see in today's example, you can create some pretty tasty melodic lines with just tones from the arpeggio. It's a great way to get started actually putting arpeggios to work in your leads. Before we go any further, I'm not knocking scales. You really need to know them. There are more notes under your fingers when you're playing a scale than just this 4-note arpeggio that we're working with. Think of this as another tool in your toolkit to help you create leads. And think of these as really the target tones for the chord that you're working over. So arpeggios are super important, and they're a really efficient way to get to know those sweet tones that you should really emphasize when it comes to playing leads. Let's listen to this A7 arpeggio at work. I'll improvise a short line over a strummed A7 chord. Four tones. Sounds nice. Work over one chord just like this is a great way to get to know your arpeggio and really get into the intervals that are at play and understand the character of each of those tones. And a good way to do this in VGI's premium membership is to loop the track that comes along with this lesson. Just loop it over just one chord. Stretch your legs out a bit on this and see what ideas you can come up with using just the chord tones. Understanding how each of these tones color the music will help you create the mood that you're going for on the guitar. Sweet. Of course, most jams have more than one chord, right? And things get really interesting when you switch your leads to match the chords. So let's take a look at an example that goes through several cycles of a bar on A7 and then a bar on D7. If you're in the key of A, it's your 1 chord and your 4 chord. You're going to change between these 2 chords a lot in a typical blues pattern. Let's break down the first few phrases of this and really dig into how we're putting the arpeggios to work. All right, this track is definitely cooking along. It's at 160 beats per minute. We got a bar of A7 followed by a bar of D7, and it just cycles over and over. And I would highly encourage you, if you're trying to jam and create some things here, start slow, right? You might even just start with the roots to really identify those changes, and then maybe move on to the thirds. right? Just to know when you're changing chords. And by the way, I know we didn't cover the D7 arpeggio explicitly, but if you know A7, you could move things up into D, but I'll give you a quick pattern here. We've got our D there, there's the root, the major third, F sharp is here. We come up to A for the fifth, and then C for the flat 7, and then of course D. Now you'll see that we can use those tones all over the place, right? And I would highly encourage you to spend some time going over what we've covered so far in A7 and then map it out in D7. So a little work that you can do outside of this lesson, and really kind of digging in and doing that work on your own is where a lot of learning really takes place. Highly recommend that you do that. All right, so what we're going to do here to open this thing up is we're going to start on beat 3, and we're just going to do a real quick kind of strums, really arpeggiated, where we just kind of like break those tones up, but it's basically an A major until we reach up for the G note, the flat 7, right? And that's happening on beat 3 and of 3. And then we drop down just before the chord changes to the F sharp. So we're really hinting at the D7 that's coming, and when the chord changes, we're there. And that's the major third of D7. So I want to point out that you don't have to be super strict with only playing A7 tones over the A7 bar and D7 tones over the D7 bar. Like, it really works well to kind of move between these chords by hinting at, just like we did here, we just kind of anticipated that D7 chord change. So then when the chord hit, it sounded sweet. It sounded like we knew the tone we were trying to land on. All right, so that's the opening phrase here. A7, hold that over the bar, and we're nicely in D7. Then what we're going to do is walk down from the D to the flat 7, the C, and then we simply go from our A down to the G. Again, we're kind of hinting at that A that's coming, right? That A happens before we go back to the, that G, flat 7 of A7, happens just before we go back to A. It's just a great way to hint at it, and just kind of let you know, pull you into that chord change. That's what we're doing here. And then we're going to make a statement that we're definitely back in A by doing this little double hammer-on move from the flat third, not a chord tone, I'll talk about that in a minute, up to the major third of A. All right? That hammer-on is just one way that you can articulate the note that you're going for. You could slide into it, or whatever feels good to you in the moment, but definitely do that. You could slide the other way. It doesn't really matter. What you've got to do is think major third, right? And we can add that articulation however we choose, right? And that's just a simple way to do it, one that you hear a lot in the blues. So far we've got. All right, the next measure is over D, and we're going to just move through the chord tones there as well. And we've got one of those articulations where we slid down from G to F sharp. Sounds pretty cool. Now these two notes, super important. They give the D7 a lot of its character, the major third and the flat 7 of D7. So we're working those two very important tones from the arpeggio in, and this really sounds sweet in context. And then we're simply moving back up into A7. We're going to play the flat 7 and the major third. All right, that's G, and that's our C sharp here. And notice that we articulated those with a cool, double stop where we're sliding into those notes. All All right, and I want to take a quick second and just point out that the two very important tones from D, right, the flat or the major third, the flat 7, kind of flip themselves when we move back to A. Flat 7, major third, flat 7 of D, and then flat 7 major third of A. Really cool. Just move from here to here, right? Super cool, definitely bluesy. We got a tritone sound going on right here. Not that, that was not cool. All right, so those are the first few measures. Let's hear this played up to tempo. For me, learning the basics about arpeggios and then putting them into action was huge for my ability to create solos that sounded like they knew what the chords were. Doing so over a 2-chord vamp like the one in this lesson is a great way to practice the arpeggios with a purpose. And premium members have access to this track along with the Sound Slice tab player and the full solo over the 2-chord vamp tabbed out. And you can slow this down and you can see the chord changes happening on the screen as they're playing along. So if you're not already a premium member, there's a link in the description where you can find out how to join. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this lesson, and I'll see you back here next Tuesday for another Acoustic Blues lesson. Until then, practice smart and play on.